She left me homeless for her mother, so I gave her mother a home she'll never forget. It's strange how quickly a home can stop feeling like one. 1 minute, you're sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, watching your wife laugh at some reality show. The next, you're standing on the sidewalk with a single duffel bag, the front door locked behind you, and everything you've ever built gone. That was me, Marcus, 53 years old, married for 25 of those years to someone I thought was my best friend, my soulmate, the person I'd grow old with. But all of that changed the moment her mother moved in. I never liked Judith, my mother-in-law. From the beginning, she treated me like an inconvenience. She always had something to criticize: my job, my car, my family. She looked at me like I was beneath her daughter, but I kept my mouth shut. I wanted peace. I wanted my wife Laura to have a good relationship with her mom, and if that meant swallowing my pride now and then, I could do it. Or so I thought. When Judith's health started to decline, mild arthritis, forgetfulness, Laura insisted she move in with us. It's just temporary, she told me. She needs help, and I trust you. But it wasn't temporary. And she didn't trust me, not really. From the moment Judith brought her suitcase through our front door, everything shifted. My routines were invaded. My opinions were ignored. My space, my kitchen, my quiet evenings all gone. It started small. Judith began reorganizing things in the house. My tools disappeared from the garage. My bookshelves were emptied. Then came the comments, snide little jabs about my cooking, my clothes, my lack of ambition. And Laura? She stopped defending me. She said I was imagining things, that Judith was just old, and I needed to be more patient. But the worst part wasn't the insults. It was how Laura started changing. She took Judith's side in every disagreement. She stopped asking me how my day was. She didn't laugh at my jokes anymore. And then one night, she said something I'll never forget. You should stay with your brother for a while. Give mom some space to settle in. That hit me like a punch to the chest. Our home, the house I had spent years paying for, the walls I painted, the garden I planted, the floorboards I fixed with my own hands. Suddenly I wasn't welcome there. I was being replaced, not just pushed aside, but evicted from my own life. And for what? So a bitter, manipulative woman could take my place at the dinner table? I packed my things that night. No shouting, no begging, just quiet heartbreak. I stayed on my brother's couch for a few weeks, then moved into a small rental apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A mattress on the floor, a chipped coffee table, and silence. So much silence. But in that silence, something began to grow, a seed of clarity and anger. Laura never once checked in on me. No calls, no texts, no apologies. I heard through mutual friends that she was redecorating, that she and her mother had turned my office into a tea room, that they got new furniture, that Judith had started hosting her book club in my living room. They were erasing me, and that's when I decided I wasn't going to let it happen. Not without a fight, not without a little poetic justice. I didn't want to hurt Laura, not really, but I couldn't ignore the betrayal. I gave her my youth, my loyalty, my heart, and she traded me out like old furniture. So I started planning something that would remind her and Judith that not everyone forgives and forgets. I knew Judith had one weakness: her pride. She flaunted it like a peacock. Everything had to look perfect from the outside. She cared about appearances more than anything: her spotless reputation, her social circles, her superiority complex. So I decided, if they were going to leave me homeless for her mother, I'd give her mother a new home she'd never forget. Judith had spent her entire life pretending she was something more than she was. She acted like she came from royalty, like she had fine taste, money, and power. But in reality, she was just a retired high school secretary who happened to marry a man with a decent pension. When he died, she inherited his condo and his arrogance. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted to live like a queen, and unfortunately, Laura let her. That's why when she moved into our house, my house, she came with boxes of antiques, silverware that hadn't seen sunlight in 20 years, and books she never read but liked to display. That was the mask Judith wore: elegance. She thought if she looked like she belonged in the pages of a lifestyle magazine, people wouldn't see the bitterness beneath. But I saw it. I had lived with it, and I knew exactly how to break it. First, I had to learn everything about her. I started slow, harmless, really. I showed up to a few of the same public events I knew she liked attending. I bumped into some of her friends at the farmer's market, the local library, the garden center. I smiled, made small talk, let them tell me things without even realizing it. And oh, they love to talk. I learned that Judith had a small property in her name, a vacation home she never mentioned to Laura. It was a little house 2 towns over, something her late husband had bought decades ago. She didn't go there much, it was old, needed repairs, but it was still standing. More importantly, it was hers alone, and it was perfect. I drove out to see it one rainy Tuesday afternoon. The place looked abandoned, roof slightly caved in on one side, weeds taller than my knees, windows covered in grime. But I saw potential, not for renovation, not for comfort, but for revenge. I started spending evenings there, cleaning it up, just enough to make it accessible. I brought in cameras, tools, and over time, furniture. Not nice furniture. No, I bought everything secondhand, scratched, stained, warped with age. I filled that little house with the exact opposite of Judith's perfection. It was like building a twisted mirror of everything she valued: chaos instead of order, dust instead of polish, decay instead of control. But I wasn't done. I started mailing things to the house, magazines with her name on them, mailers from retirement homes, invitations to grief support groups. I wanted to create a story, a believable one, a story where Judith had quietly moved out to this crumbling little home, abandoned by her daughter, forgotten by her friends. I wanted this place to feel like her future, lonely, broken, a shadow of the life she thought she deserved. And then came the final touch. I wrote a letter, not to Judith, but to Laura. It was from a fake social worker one I created, complete with a business card and email address. The letter said Judith had been found living alone, confused, in poor conditions, that she had suffered a possible fall, that someone needed to come immediately to help her. That letter was hand-delivered to Laura's mailbox on a Friday evening. I knew Laura would panic. I knew she'd grab her keys without thinking. And I knew she'd bring friends, maybe even neighbors, to witness the tragedy. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because when she walked into that house, when she saw the disaster, the filth, the broken furniture with Judith's name stitched onto throw pillows, she'd feel it. The guilt, the fear, the confusion. She'd think she'd failed her mother. She'd believe Judith was suffering because she wasn't paying attention. But Judith wasn't there, of course. She was still sipping chamomile in my old kitchen, none the wiser. And Laura? She was about to face the one thing she could never explain away, her own reflection, painted across the walls of a ruined home she thought her mother had been hiding in. The trap was almost ready. All I needed now was a little more time. And a little more pain. The night before I triggered the final phase, I sat parked down the street from my old house, the one Laura had taken from me. The lights were on in every room, like they were trying to burn away guilt. Inside, Judith was lounging in my chair, eating from my dishes, while Laura walked around looking like everything was normal. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she thought, if she ignored the wreckage she'd caused, it wouldn't reach her. But I wasn't going to let her get away with that. At 6:40 p.m., Laura finally opened the letter. I watched through binoculars as she unfolded it at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Her shoulders stiffened. I saw the worry take over. She clutched her phone, called someone, maybe a friend, maybe her therapist. Then, just as I'd planned, she grabbed her keys and ran for the car. I followed her at a distance. She didn't drive fast. It was one of those quiet, uncertain drives, like her mind was running faster than her wheels. She pulled up to the house just as the sun was setting. I stayed hidden in the woods nearby, watching her reaction. She got out, approached the front door like she was walking into a grave. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside, called out, "Mom?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "Mom, are you here?" The silence hit her like a brick wall. Then came the smell. I'd left a few expired groceries in the kitchen, a carton of milk, a half-open container of deli meat, just enough to make the place feel real. Laura covered her mouth, eyes scanning the filth. The floor creaked as she moved further in. She saw the framed pictures I'd hung on the wall, Judith's high school graduation. She stumbled into the bedroom. The sheets were stained. The closet was filled with moth-eaten coats and threadbare dresses, some of them actually Judith's, stolen from donation bins and estate sales by people I paid online. Everything was carefully curated to make Laura believe her mother had been living there for months, forgotten, neglected, suffering. That's when she called 911. Her voice shook as she told the operator she believed her elderly mother had been living alone, that she might have fallen, that there were signs of dementia. She cried, not for me, not even for Judith. She cried for herself, for the image of herself she had destroyed. It took the paramedics 15 minutes to arrive. I watched them walk in, gloves on, professional, confused by what they found. They asked Laura questions. She couldn't answer. She had no proof Judith had ever been there. There were no records, no utility bills in Judith's name, no neighbors who'd seen her. The paramedics exchanged looks, called it in as a false report, suggested she take a break, maybe talk to someone. Laura's face crumbled. By the time she drove back home that night, she looked like she'd aged 10 years. And when she walked back into that beautiful house, the one I had poured my life into, she no longer looked like someone who'd won. She looked like someone who'd lost and didn't even know how. But I wasn't done, because Judith still sat untouched in her little throne, smug and protected. She still believed she had power, and that meant I had to go deeper. It was time to make her doubt the one thing she thought she could always count on, her daughter, and I knew just how to do it. The day after Laura's breakdown at the abandoned house, I made my next move. This part wasn't about noise or chaos, it was about erosion. Quiet, subtle erosion. The kind that eats away at trust, day by day, until there's nothing left but suspicion and fear. Judith thought she was safe. But now, I was going to make her question the very foundation of that safety, her relationship with Laura. I started with small things. Laura's credit card was declined at her favorite cafe. Her Amazon packages mysteriously stopped arriving. An email went out from her account to her work supervisor asking for emergency leave due to family issues, an email she never sent. Her phone began glitching. Calls dropped. Texts wouldn't send. I had hired a freelance tech expert to help make this happen, someone who could manipulate enough digital threads to make it all seem like Laura was unraveling. Then came the photos. One morning, Judith walked into the kitchen to find a manila envelope sitting on the counter. No stamp, no address. Inside were 5 printed photos. They were surveillance style, slightly blurry, but unmistakable. One was of Laura sitting alone in her car, staring into nothing. Another of her walking out of a liquor store she never remembered visiting. A third showed her at that same broken-down house where she thought Judith had been living, taken from an angle that suggested someone else had been watching too. The last photo showed Laura sitting at a bus stop with her head in her hands. No context, no message, just doubt. Judith didn't say anything that morning. She simply stared at the photos for a long time. Then she tucked them away in her purse. I knew what that meant. She didn't trust Laura enough to ask. But she didn't trust herself enough to ignore it. That night, Judith waited up for Laura like a worried mother from a Hallmark film. When Laura walked in, tired and quiet, Judith launched into passive-aggressive concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart? You've been distant lately." Laura, already on edge from all the tech glitches and workplace stress, snapped back. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just tired." Judith pushed a little more. "You know, I've noticed you've been going out a lot. Strange places. Is there something I should know?" The room went cold. Laura's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Judith backed off, but it was too late. I could already see it. The seed had been planted. Over the next few days, the cracks widened. Laura began keeping to herself, locking her bedroom door, making late-night phone calls in whispers. Judith, always nosy, began eavesdropping. She even went so far as to check Laura's purse when she wasn't home. And what did she find? Another envelope, this time with an anonymous letter inside. "You don't know your daughter at all. She's been hiding everything. Ask her where she was Tuesday night." That Tuesday, Laura had been with a friend, someone I paid to invite her out under the pretense of a girls' night, then took staged photos of her looking drunk and disoriented. The friend was in on it, of course, and the photos had just the right amount of scandal to make them seem like proof of something much darker. Judith was now fully convinced something was wrong. She didn't confront Laura immediately. No, Judith was too cunning for that. Instead, she began playing detective in her own home. I could only imagine her going through Laura's mail, her computer history, maybe even trying to follow her one day. But nothing she found gave her the clarity she craved, only more fog. And then came the voicemail. Judith received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end, altered by software, said something chilling. "She's lying to you. She's not who you think she is. Look in the vent behind the laundry room." Of course, I had planted something there, an old journal, fake but convincing, written in Laura's handwriting. The entries detailed a double life. shady meetings with strangers, cryptic references to someone named D, and one haunting line repeated over and over. I wish Mom would just disappear. That broke her. I watched from afar as Judith staggered out of the house that day, clutching the fake journal like it was evidence of a murder. She looked pale, like all the color had been drained from her. The woman who once mocked me with that cruel smirk now looked genuinely afraid of her daughter, exactly as planned. Judith began to unravel. The house that once buzzed with her inflated sense of control now sat under a suffocating silence. She barely spoke to Laura anymore. Every word between them had become laced with suspicion, every glance a test, every silence a scream. The fake journal had done its job. It haunted her. It lived in her purse, hidden under receipts and breath mints, like a cancer she couldn't admit to having. But now, it was time for Laura to feel what it was like to have the world slowly crumble beneath her feet. You see, betrayal works best when it's not sudden, it's corrosive. So I turned my attention to the people she trusted most. Her best friend Ashley received an anonymous Dropbox link. In it were screenshots of messages fabricated, of course showing Laura making cruel jokes about Ashley's miscarriage, mocking her appearance, and accusing her of sleeping with her ex. None of it was real, but it didn't have to be. I'd done my homework. Ashley was fragile, emotional, and impulsive. By the time Laura called her that evening, Ashley had already blocked her on everything. Laura was blindsided, confused. She left a voicemail. Ash, please. I don't know what's going on. Can we talk? But silence followed. And as Laura paced around the living room, venting to Judith, the older woman barely responded. She didn't even look up. That was the final twist of the knife. Laura was alone in her own home, abandoned by both friend and family. And I wasn't done. At work, Laura began noticing her co-workers whispering more. A harmless joke in a group chat was forwarded to her along with a doctored screenshot of Laura allegedly making an inappropriate racial comment. HR launched a quiet investigation. They didn't fire her, but the meetings became more frequent. The tension in the office became unbearable. Laura, once confident and bubbly, now flinched when her phone rang. Judith saw it all and did nothing, but she noticed. That was important. One night, I made sure Judith overheard a phone call Laura never actually made. I spliced together old voicemails, cut and edited audio using deepfake tools, and played it through a hidden Bluetooth speaker inside the wall. Judith, half asleep on the couch, heard her daughter's voice echo faintly from the kitchen. She's losing it. I can't do this anymore. Maybe she should be in a home. I don't care anymore. It sounded just real enough to work. Judith froze, sat up, listened, and when the house went quiet again, she got up and walked to Laura's room. But she didn't knock. She didn't say a word. She simply stood outside that door, hand trembling, lips pressed shut. For the first time, the roles had reversed. Judith was now the one feeling unsafe in her own house. A few nights later, Laura returned home to find Judith sitting in the living room, fully dressed, purse in hand, and suitcase at her feet. I think I need a break, Judith said softly. Maybe I'll stay with Aunt May for a few days. She didn't wait for permission. She left that night. Laura stood in the hallway, confused and rattled. Her support system was crumbling and she didn't even know why, exactly as planned. But the real twist was just around the corner. I had been slowly drawing Laura toward the very edge of emotional collapse. Her reputation was damaged, her closest relationships severed, her sense of stability gone. She was lost. And when people are lost, they look for something, anything to hold on to. A friend, a voice, a connection. That's when I re-entered her life, not as myself, as someone new, a stranger on a support forum, a username, an ally. I started commenting on her posts anonymously, those desperate late-night cries for help she never thought anyone would read. I told her I understood, that I'd been through something similar. I became her digital lifeline. Kind, compassionate, carefully guiding her to share more. And when she did, when she admitted she felt like her life was falling apart, I sent one final message. Sometimes, the people who break us are the ones we trust the most. But you already know that, don't you? The message hit like a blade. That was the moment Laura began to suspect Judith. Yes, her own mother. I'd turned them completely against each other, without ever stepping foot in the house they'd once stolen from me. And now, with both women unraveling in isolation, it was time to move into the final act, one that would leave scars they'd carry for the rest of their lives. She left me homeless for her mother, so I gave her mother a home she'll never forget. The human mind is never more vulnerable than when it's trying to make sense of chaos. Laura's thoughts had turned against her, circling around invisible betrayals, imagined conversations, and mistrust so deep it had started to wear down her body. She looked thinner. Her eyes, once full of superiority and ego, now darted from corner to corner like someone expecting shadows to speak. But she still had no idea where the destruction was really coming from. Perfect. The time had come for the final stage of the Operation Exposure. Remember the old, quiet neighbor 2 houses down? Mrs. Albright, who Laura used to mock for smelling like mothballs and cats. She was actually my aunt. I paid her bills for years, and it just so happened that her garage had the perfect view into Laura's backyard and a long-forgotten view into Laura's past. One day, while Laura was out, I arranged for a small delivery van to stop by. A couple of crates were unloaded, labeled estate storage, all filled with things that should not have existed anymore. Old photos of me and Laura, letters, torn pages from my journals, even a framed picture of us with Judith from before everything went south. The catch? Every single item was planted with fingerprints, hers, not mine, and they'd all been mailed from Laura's address. That night, Judith came home to find Laura sitting at the kitchen table, the crate opened in front of her, photos spread out like a crime scene. Her hands were shaking. "Why are these here?" she asked her mother. "Why would someone send this stuff now?" Judith, already paranoid and teetering on the edge of distrust, gave her a cold look. "I didn't send anything. But you've been talking to someone, haven't you? Whispering about putting me away. You lied to me, Laura. I heard you." "What? What are you talking about?" Laura stood up, panicked. "You're the one who's been acting weird, distant, like you're watching me, like you're hiding something." Judith's voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe I am." The argument exploded. Screaming, accusations, tears. Neighbors could hear them. One even recorded it. Judith stormed out again, this time not to her sisters but to a hotel room alone. She was beginning to question everything, her memories, her daughter, even her own sanity. That was the point. That was always the point. Now with them fractured, desperate, and afraid of each other, I introduced the final player, not as myself, of course, but as a victim in a local community outreach group Laura had recently joined. I knew she would attend a gathering that weekend alone, fragile, craving support, so I attended too. New name, new face, same old anger. I sat across from her, anonymous in a crowd of pain. We talked. She said her name was Laura, that she was just going through stuff at home. I nodded. I said my name was Daniel, and as I spoke, I described a relationship that sounded painfully familiar to her. A woman who had manipulated and betrayed me, who used her mother like a weapon, who destroyed my life and thought she got away with it. Laura's eyes widened just slightly. She whispered, "That's weird. I went through something like that too." And for a few moments we bonded. She trusted me. She smiled. She thanked me. "It's so strange," she said. "You sound like someone I used to know." I smiled back and said, "Yeah, people have that effect sometimes." The trap was sealed. The next day, I delivered the final blow. Laura received a package at her door. Inside was a binder, a thick, horrifying binder, titled The Plan. It contained printed screenshots of our conversations, photos of her house, audio recordings, some real, some faked, notes and handwriting that looked like Judith's. And in the very back, a single typed page. She was never the target. You were. She ran to Judith that evening, panicked, furious. "What is this? Why are you doing this to me?" But Judith didn't open the door. She had received the same package, only hers contained an identical note. She was never the target. You were. Both women now believed the other had masterminded an elaborate psychological attack. Their trust had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Neither of them could sleep. Paranoia turned them into prisoners in their own separate corners of the world. And I watched it all unfold, because revenge is not about a single strike. It's 1,000 cuts in silence. It's showing them what it feels like to have everything they once controlled slip through their fingers while the world stands still and watches them scream. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one final confrontation. Coming. Face to face. Truth exposed. And it would happen where everything started, back at the house. I waited. I waited for weeks. No contact from Melanie. No apology. No explanation. Not even a single text to check if I was alive, or if I had found a roof over my head. She'd thrown me out like I was garbage, and I realized something she never loved. Me. I was just her convenience. Someone to cook, clean, pay bills, and support her ambitions. Once her mother arrived, I became disposable, but I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. I was tired of swallowing pain. I wanted justice, but I didn't want to just scream or break things. I wanted her and her mother to feel the exact same helplessness I felt. I didn't want revenge with fists. I wanted something colder, something that would stay in their minds forever. You see, Melanie's mother Linda was obsessed with control. Everything had to be done her way. The furniture in perfect rows, the walls all painted beige, food made a certain way. She even made a schedule for when the dogs could go outside. Melanie called her the queen of routines. But what happens when that queen is dethroned? I started planning, slowly, quietly. I had nothing but time. I got a part-time job at a cafe, lived in a cheap motel and saved everything I could. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator. Yes, a PI. I wanted to know everything about Linda, her habits, her fears, what made her comfortable, and what made her unravel. And boy, did I learn a lot. Linda had a dark secret, severe anxiety triggered by chaos, disorder, loud sounds, bright changing lights. Her biggest fear? Being in an environment she couldn't control. One small thing, out of place, and she'd spiral into panic attacks. She took medication daily just to keep herself level. She needed silence, order, and routine. That was her weakness. And I was going to give her a new home filled with the exact opposite. But first, I needed access. So I befriended their neighbor, a sweet old woman named Ruth. I offered to help with her groceries, fixed her leaky sink, and walked her dog when it rained. In return, she let me stay at her place for a few nights when she visited her daughter. Across town, from Ruth's second-story window, I could see everything happening in Melanie's house. I saw Linda on her yoga mat every morning at 6 o'clock a.m. sharp. I watched her vacuum the living room 3 times a day. I saw how she rearranged the couch cushions if even one was tilted slightly. It was laughable. But I didn't laugh. I studied her, memorized her every move. Then came phase 1, access. One day, Ruth accidentally left the garden gate open right next to Melanie's side entrance. I slipped in and dropped a small Bluetooth speaker beneath their living room couch. It was silent, invisible, controlled through an app on my phone. Then I left, without touching a thing. The following night, at 3 o'clock a.m., I activated the speaker, a baby scream, loud, piercing. I could see the lights flick on instantly, curtains pulled back, panic everywhere. 2 nights later, I did it again, this time, barking dogs. Then, crashing, glass, nothing too long, just 15 seconds of chaos, enough to wake them, enough to disrupt their sacred routine. Linda looked more tired every day, Melanie too. They started arguing on the porch. Ruth told me she overheard Linda calling the house haunted. It was working. Phase 2, confusion. I bought a universal garage remote online and reprogrammed it. Late one night, I opened and closed their garage door 4 times in a row. I never stepped inside. I wanted them to doubt their own security. Linda stopped going outside. She clutched her rosary during her morning yoga. Melanie installed to security cameras, but nothing. Then came phase 3, the finale. I left a package on their doorstep. Inside, a single Polaroid photo of their kitchen, taken the night before. Everything looked normal except the fridge door was slightly open. Just like how Linda feared, there was no note, just that photo. Melanie called the police, but they found no fingerprints, no forced entry, just silence. That was my art, my message. I never wanted to hurt them physically. I wanted them to feel exactly what I felt, like their world was crumbling from the inside out. I wanted them to lie awake at night, wondering what they did to deserve this. And trust me, they did. 1 week later, Linda moved out, packed all her beige rugs and yoga mats and left without saying goodbye to anyone. Melanie posted a story about restarting her life and finding peace, but her eyes were empty, her smile forced. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. I didn't destroy their house. I destroyed the peace inside it. I didn't raise a hand. I just held up a mirror and let them shatter themselves. And the best part, I wasn't done yet. When I got back to my small apartment after that chaotic dinner, my hands trembled as I placed the shopping bag with the smashed teacups on the counter. I had no appetite. My stomach churned with a mix of betrayal, guilt, and adrenaline. I had just delivered the first blow. But now, the question was what next? There was no turning back. I had made the choice to give Helen a home she'd never forget. The wheels were in motion, and I had to see it through. But this time, it wasn't about revenge for the sake of anger. It was about making a point. It was about forcing her to feel what I had felt, abandoned, helpless, and unwanted. And it had to be poetic. That night, I stayed up late into the early hours, crafting the final stages of my plan. By morning, I had already made some phone calls. The old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, long abandoned, was still owned by my late uncle's estate, and after years of neglect, it was practically in ruins. It didn't have running water, and the roof leaked during storms. No one had dared go near it for years because of how isolated and overgrown the surrounding area was. It was the perfect stage. I cleaned it just enough to look livable from the outside. Then, using the contacts I still had from my old career in real estate, I sent Helen an official-looking letter that appeared to be from a prestigious charity. It said she had been chosen as the recipient of a luxurious private retreat home for the elderly, a place to rest, reflect, and reclaim independence. I made sure it was written in the flowery language she adored. It was as sweet and fake as the compliments she used to give me. To my surprise, Helen called me the day after receiving the letter. "You won't believe the blessing I've just received," she gloated, voice trembling with excitement. "A private retreat house. Me. Can you believe it? I knew the universe would reward me eventually." I feigned surprise and joy. "That's wonderful, Helen. You deserve it." We agreed I'd drive her to the house on Sunday. She didn't want her daughter involved because she wanted it to be a surprise. That suited me perfectly. When Sunday came, I picked her up early. Helen wore a pink blazer, pearls, and her finest perfume. Her face was glowing with pride, acting as though she'd finally received the status she always believed she deserved. The drive to the farmhouse was silent for the most part. She kept looking out the window, humming to herself, like she was imagining where she'd place her furniture. When we finally arrived, her face slowly began to change. The long dirt road, the creaky gate, the overgrown weeds. She looked confused. I pulled the car up beside the front door. The farmhouse looked eerily still, almost too quiet. "Is this it?" she asked, the smile fading. "It's just rustic," I said calmly. "They told me it was undergoing renovations. But don't worry, it's fully yours." Helen slowly stepped out of the car and approached the door. She pushed it open, and the smell of old wood and damp air hit her immediately. Her eyes darted around the dusty interior, the peeling wallpaper, the rusted stove, the single rocking chair in the corner. She turned to me, stunned. "This is a joke, right?" I shook my head. "This is your home, Helen. Just like you left me with nothing but a suitcase, I'm offering you a fresh start. No daughter to help, no son-in-law to blame, just you and your new palace." She screamed at me, then said things I won't repeat. She demanded I take her back, but I had prepared for this. I told her she was free to leave anytime, but she'd have to call a cab herself, something I knew she couldn't do from the isolated farmhouse without cell reception. I handed her a paper with the fake charity's contact number and turned to leave. "You'll regret this," she shrieked. "Maybe," I replied, "but I think you'll finally understand how it feels to be abandoned." That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. There wasn't joy in her pain, but there was peace in knowing that I had taken back the dignity she tried to strip from me. I didn't want her to suffer, I just wanted her to reflect. Whether she would or not was no longer my concern. Back in my life, something began to shift. My daughter, maybe sensing something was wrong, began reaching out. I didn't answer her at first, but slowly, over time, I started to let her back, and not for her sake, but for my grandson. He deserved to know his grandmother wasn't some bitter woman pushed aside for a newer model. He deserved to know the truth. 1 week after Helen's retreat, my daughter called crying. "She says you dumped her in some broken shack. Is it true?" I replied. "Did she tell you how she dumped me on the streets? Or how she took my place in the will?" There was silence on the other end. "Mom, I didn't know. Now you do." What I had done wasn't clean or noble. It wasn't the kind of thing heroes are praised for, but it was honest. I had been wronged, pushed beyond my limits, and for once I stood up for myself in a way they couldn't ignore. In the final section, we'll see whether my daughter chooses to stay in Helen's corner, or whether this act of revenge cracks open the family's truth for good. And most importantly, you'll find out whether revenge brought justice or something far more dangerous. Stick around for the last chapter. It's where all the secrets spill out. As the weeks passed, I spent my time preparing the final stroke of my plan. While everyone thought I had vanished from the picture, I was quietly crafting my masterpiece. I hired an architect not to build something beautiful, but to create an exact replica of the guest house where Mabel now lived. My goal wasn't comfort or luxury, it was precision and poetic justice. I wanted to build her a home so unforgettable, it would haunt her long after the walls came down. You see, I'd discovered that Mabel hated three things: humidity, tight spaces, and mirrors. Her daughter once told me in passing that her mother had a fear of seeing her own reflection in small, dark spaces, something about childhood trauma. I didn't think much of it then, but now, I took notes like a detective working a case. Every quirk, every aversion, every fear became part of my blueprint. The new home I built was nestled in a humid, marshy plot just on the edge of town, far from any friendly neighbors or Wi-Fi signals. It was quiet, perfect for what I had in mind. Inside, the rooms were small, and the hallways narrow. The walls were lined with reflective panels, not quite mirrors, but just reflective enough that no matter where you turned, you saw yourself distorted, stretched, or multiplied. I called it the House of Truth, because in that house, you couldn't escape yourself. But here's the kicker: I didn't build it for her to live in. I built it as a monument, as a trap, as the climax to the play she thought she was writing. I mailed her a formal invitation, signed anonymously, offering her a free luxury weekend retreat designed specially for mothers who had sacrificed everything for their children. She bit the bait. So did Ashley. They thought it was a reward, a spa-like getaway for all the emotional labor Mabel had supposedly endured. They arrived on a Friday evening. I watched from a distance as they stepped out of their car, giddy, carrying overnight bags and wearing matching straw hats. Ashley had no idea her mother's smugness would soon melt into confusion, then fear, then regret. They entered the house, expecting massages and mimosas. But once the door shut behind them, the real experience began. The lights flickered. The AC didn't work. The mirrors distorted their faces just enough to be disturbing. The floors creaked with every step, and recordings of distant whispers played from hidden speakers behind the walls. After the first hour, Ashley tried to open the front door. It wouldn't budge. Mabel shouted for help, thinking someone was playing a prank. No one answered. Panic began to seep in like fog under a doorway. They weren't locked in forever, but for the next 12 hours, they would be completely alone. In that reflection-filled box of dread, left only with their own guilt and each other's growing accusations, I had no intention of hurting them. I just wanted them to feel a piece of what I'd felt when I was kicked out like trash. The isolation, the confusion, the realization that the people you loved most had abandoned you. And most of all, the silence that follows after betrayal, louder than any scream. By morning, Mabel broke down. Ashley followed me, tears streaming, begging for forgiveness. But I kept walking, because this wasn't about getting an apology. It was about balance, about returning what was taken from me: my dignity, my home, my peace. Here is section 10, the final part of your revenge story, titled "She Left Me Homeless for Her Mother, so I Gave Her Mother a Home She'll Never Forget." This section wraps up the narrative with a strong emotional conclusion and ending message. I never looked back, not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. I cared about myself again. That walk away from Ashley and her mother wasn't a victory march. It was liberation. It was the moment I stopped being the man who begged for love from someone who only knew how to take. I had spent months plotting, building, and crafting a perfect response to the cruelty I'd been handed. But the real revenge wasn't the mirrors or the silence or the fear. It was showing them without words what it feels like when your reality cracks open and no one comes to catch you. Ashley moved out of the guest house a week later. Word spread quickly that something had happened inside that strange place. Some called it a mental breakdown, others a supernatural event. Mabel, shaken and speechless, refused to speak to anyone about it. Her neighbors whispered theories, but no one knew the truth. No one but me, and the woman who once threw me out in favor of her mother's comfort. I sold the land. I donated the profits to a shelter for men who had been left homeless after toxic relationships, an issue no one talks about, but too many men live through. It felt poetic. That building, once used to deliver justice, now funding a place that offered healing. Because in the end, I didn't want to become like them, bitter, manipulative, heartless. I just wanted to feel clean again. Months passed. I started over in a new town, with a new job, and for the first time in years, a sense of peace that didn't come with conditions. I didn't need a mansion or a mirror to tell me who I was anymore. I had walked through heartbreak, betrayal, and rock bottom, and I didn't just survive, I rebuilt. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Ashley. I wonder if she finally understood that love isn't measured by how loudly you defend your family, but by how gently you hold someone when they're at their lowest. Maybe she still thinks I was cruel. Maybe she tells the story differently. That's fine, because I didn't do it for her. I did it for the man I used to be, sitting in his car that night, with no home, no plan, and no clue how he'd survive. That man deserved a final chapter where he got to choose the ending. Revenge doesn't always come in screams or slaps it. Sometimes comes in silence, in calm, in a well-placed mirror that shows someone exactly who they've become. But the sweetest revenge isn't punishment, it's peace. And when you find that, you win.